Welcome back, everybody. We're in the process of getting ready for King of the Hammers and going over some of the damage on the car from last season and getting ready to add some new and exciting parts that'll take us across the finish line. If you're watching some of our videos, you've seen that at our last race we took a little bit of a nosedive into a berm as we were chasing somebody in some dust. Because of that, we have quite a bit of damage. One of the things that actually saved us was our Schrockworks skid plate. Because of that skid plate, it saved a lot of our vital components, such as our radiator. While it is bent, we were able to keep racing. And so for that, we're really grateful. One of the other problems we found was that we were actually cracking all of these pieces of sheet metal in the front end. So all around our fender wells, all of those cracked on both sides and bent down. And then in the front here, we actually almost ripped our hood pins out. So we're going to go through, we're going to reinforce all of that with sheet metal and some angle, get that all nice and strong so that we're not having any problems as we move forward and we have a nice solid frame to build off of. And then we're going to work on tying our front bumper, our shock towers, and all of these components inside into the rest of our cage. When we first started talking about how we were going to connect our front bumper into this engine cage, one of the things we found was that we weren't really able to do so while retaining our air conditioning. There's a lot of hoses and lines that come off on the inside that would prevent us from being able to pass a tube through within the rules. And one of the ways we're going to do that is actually coming through these holes that are already in the chassis of the vehicle. So we had to say goodbye to our air conditioning. We will retain heat for those cold mornings when we're racing, but we also found we weren't really using the air conditioning. We were going fast enough, staying cool and things like that. So it was just extra weight and clutter. Aside from some of the reinforcements we're going to be making up front, we have a lot of exciting new parts coming over the next couple of weeks, such as long travel, bigger shocks, a forward 9-inch, 4-link in the rear. We're also going to be adding gears and lockers front and rear.
So yeah, as Will said, we pretty much have a ton of work to do before King of the Hammers, so let's get started on it. So the thing I want to get started on right now is actually running our main tubes for our engine cage, which we're going to be landing. This is the top of our coil bucket. We don't actually use the coil bucket anymore. This is actually just our upper control arm mounts. So I'll show you from in here. So we cut it all out to put these shock towers in, but what we're going to do is run some plates up from our old coil buckets to our shock towers, and then we're going to land tubes on top of those coil buckets that will go up, connect over to the other side, and come down, and then we can build off of that to go into our main cage and also come back out to our front bumper. So I'm going to start working on getting some tubes ready that we can land on these, come up. We are going to be replacing this intake with a simple cold air intake, so that'll give us more room for our cage. We're going to get rid of this big air box here, and that'll give us good airflow as well as a lot of room to build this cage. So I'm going to get started on prepping these to put some tubes on it, get some tubes cut and tacked in, and then we'll go from there. So I got the spots our tubes are going to land all prepped. I sanded it and got the Dremel in on this side and all ready for some weld on both sides. So I'm going to just drop some tubes on. They're going to come straight off, so I'm just going to get these tacked on and then we can cut them once they're both landed on each side, and then that'll give us something to work off of. All right, so one thing that I've been working on, as you've seen, is this engine cage. It came together pretty well. We had to do a sleeve tube over the top section, but that's kind of nice because it actually adds a good bit of strength over this, and it made it way easier to set this whole thing up. So right now we have the main posts coming up off the coil buckets, and then we have these flanges that we made and cut out on our Waterjet, and this allows us to actually unbolt this whole top section. So if we ever need to do work on our motor, we can just pull the whole thing out, and we can actually pull the motor out without cutting any of our engine cage apart. So this will make this way easier to work on the motor, and it's going to really beef up the front end of our truck. And then these that stick out the front, these are going to tie into our front bumper. And we're also doing these flanges here that allow us to unbolt our front bumper and pull it off. And without the bumper on, these are still really low profile. And with it on, it'll still be extremely strong, and it'll allow us to tie these tubes into the stinger on our Addicted Off-Road front bumper. So when we're winching, the only thing taking the force won't just be these frame plates where the bumper bolts onto. It'll be this and our engine cage. So we shouldn't have any movement out of our bumper when we're winching. It's really close.
Oh, it's. Oh, now we're on another one. Oh.
All right, so we finally finished the engine cage, which is sweet. We had some issues after welding in our tie-ins to the actual roll cage themselves, which took about 3 or 4 hours to land both these tubes and weld everything, and they actually turned out really good. We do need to tape the gaps in our holes. They're a little bigger than we would have liked, but nothing to be concerned about. But yeah, everything's in. This tube is easily unboltable, so you can get your engine out really easily. We got them tied into the coil buckets, and then we'll tie those coil buckets into our shock towers. So everything will all be tied together, and then the only thing left to do on this engine cage is actually tied into our front bumper. But we're gonna rebuild this cross member first, which we have a lot of great access to now that we've pulled our radiator out. We're pulling the steering rack out and the front diff out. So yeah, good progress.
So we're about halfway through working on the front end here, kind of pulling everything apart. In the process of taking the front diff out, which will give us better access to take the steering rack out, so we can kind of take some measurements, figure out what needs to happen to fit the bigger steering rack in here. But we were fighting getting the CVs out for a while, so that's gonna need to get upgraded, but kind of new is coming with the long travel anyways, so all good work here. We just gotta keep progressing. So for the steering rack, this is what we're upgrading to. This is out of a 200 series Land Cruiser, and we found a few people doing this, like Marlin Crawler is using this as their Mar rack. Stellar Built has swapped in a few. So we just got basically a brand new one, aftermarket, and we're gonna see if we can make this fit, try and machine some adapters and put some Heim steering on here, see how it all works out.
Wait, let's see those threads.
No, don't look. Don't look at those.
Wait, where'd they go?
Here, I can show you them actually. See this small metal pile right here?
Yeah, on the ground.
That was the threads. Oh, yep, it's him.
Yeah, a lot of people say take a good stuff.
Kinda. That worked so well. It's the whole body.
No. Go back in. A little more.
You got a good time. Yeah.
Where's the fluid going to come out of? That's, if we get it all the way in, that's to the top.
And you put.
I get what you're saying. It's a.
So these aren't the prettiest welds, but we bent a lot of this when we had that big G out at our last race. So Instead of just bolting this bumper back on like you normally would, this cross member for the bumper, I'm just gluing it all back in. I'm just welding it to the frame, which is really going to strengthen up a lot of this. And then I'm going to run some gussets on the back side here. And then I'm rebuilding this cross member across the bottom where that skid plate goes. Yeah, so I'm blasting through powder coat to get these welds in so they kind of look like garbage. But they're not bad for going directly through paint. So I'm not too upset. But yeah, once this is all welded back in, I'll start working on this lower cross member and getting this Shockworks skid plate, our new one, attached under here to make sure it all bolts in. And then we can start working on our steering, front diff. And then if I go over here, these guys are pulling the old rear axle out to get the new one in and start mocking all this up. All right, there it is.
It doesn't move.
Right now I'm working on some supports for our bumper. This is tying our front bumper into our engine cage. So when we're doing hard winch pulls with this worn winch, the frame isn't the only thing holding the bumper on. It's also going to be tied into all this. So now I got to do this same thing on the other side, and then we might put some gussets under here. Not sure yet. We'll see. But cruising right along.